Welcome back to another episode of A Gift from Adversity. My name is Juri. I'm your host. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today we have a wonderful guest. But before we introduce our guest, I want to introduce my book, which is the same title as A Gift from Adversity podcast. It's called A Gift from Adversity, and subtitle is Overcoming Sexual Abuse, Domestic Violence, Bullying, and Homelessness. And it's available on Amazon. And I published my book in 2020. And after I published my book, I felt very compelled to share not only on book format, but create a podcast and really make a social media platform where people can share their adversities. But not only that, tools that they use to overcome and a gift that came from it. So I'm very grateful that today we are recording episode 81 and guests are from all over the world. So let's invite today's guest. Hi, JT. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, happy Tuesday, Juri. Thank you for having me here. Appreciate the opportunity to share a beautiful conversation with you.
Great. So, JT, can you please tell our audience where you're coming in from, and what you do, your website, and the social media, etc.?
Yeah, my name is JT Tsui. I am currently in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to help show others what's possible when you go all in and truly bet on yourself. And there's many different ways in which I do that. I was a high school educator for 15 plus years. Now I'm coaching, speaking, writing, podcasting. So just finding new ways, new opportunities to reach and meet people where they're at.
And then, what is your website or social media that people can follow you?
Yeah, the social media is across the same across all social media: Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. It's at _JT_Tsui. It's so for any of that are watching live, it's in the name there. And my website is www.jtsui, all one word.com.
And what can people find on your website?
Yeah, they can find a little bit more about one of the adversities that I experienced in my life and how I chose to turn it into a beautiful gift. They can learn more about a book I wrote titled "You Are Greatness." They can learn more about, the coaching, the speaking aspect, but really just an opportunity to kind of just get a glimpse and better understanding of who I am and how I sort of got here.
Got it. So jttsui.com.
Yeah.
Is that the website?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I just put it on the comment section so people can follow, and then I will put that on the description as well. So JT, let's jump into the first question, which is the adversity. So can you share your adversity with our audience? What was your adversity?
Yeah, I love that question. And I'll preface it by saying that I've had some great mentors and coaches in my life that have really helped me to get a better understanding of myself, because I believe that that's where we can truly learn from adversity and turn it into a gift. And I had a great mentor that helped me understand that pain and purpose are the same coin. They're just different sides of it. And I find that as I've been able to learn that and better understand it and apply that principle to my life, it's actually allowed me to turn more adversity into gifts. But for me, most recently, I would say the adversity that's on my heart actually stems from my relationship with my own father. And from that experience, it's been this interesting journey of self-discovery, of really learning how to navigate the ebbs and flows. But what I have found is the biggest change from the adversity was learning how to simply move forward, to stop dwelling on the past. And I realized for many years I stayed stuck because I chose to dwell on what the relationship wasn't. And there's a lot of blame, of criticism, of complaining about the way things were. And it wasn't until I had this aha where I had a friend who challenged me in a loving way with a tough question. So he loved me tough. Then I had another friend reframe and ask me again, where I really realized, I needed to forgive and forget and move forward. And it's been interesting that the adversity that I was sort of feeling, the resistance that I had towards him, that those feelings of resentment, of frustration, of anger, melted away when I simply just went and actually sat down with him at his home and just had a conversation. And so it's been a beautiful gift, and it's been amazing just to see what has shown up in my life, both personally, professionally, and in all aspects, just by simply embracing that adversity.
So let's dissect the adversity part, and then let's talk about the tools and then your friend conversation later in the podcast. So
Okay.
that's the second question that I have.
Okay.
So the first question is the adversity. So we're gonna ask later the tools and then the gift.
Okay.
But for the first part of the podcast, I want to dissect what had happened to you, adversity itself, not how you overcame
Yeah.
yet. So the relationship you mentioned with your father, what kind of relationship did you have with your father?
Yeah. It early on, I would probably say in those first formative years, 0 to 7 or 8, I remember just more positive memories, for better lack of term, right? I remember sharing experiences, laughter with my dad, and just there was just a different joy and love of life. And somewhere as I transitioned into my preteen years and moving forward for the next 30, the relationship turned more combative, right? There was a lot more do as I say, not as I do. And there seemed to be almost this hierarchy that was established where, you know, I'm your father, do as I do and do as I say. And that from there, the relationship just became more adversarial. It became more toxic. And the interesting thing is, some of the aspects of our relationship that I didn't enjoy and look back fondly on were ones that I had known had slowly started to creep into my own relationship with my own son as I started to have it. So, yeah, it was real interesting observing how that adversity had grown and evolved in my own relationship with my father, but then how it started to seep into my relationship with my own son.
So did you experience any abuse, or it's almost like verbal or more of controlling, kind of emotional?
Yeah, I would say, and again, this is sharing in an objective way and understanding that my parents did the best they could based on their lived experience, based on their upbringing, based on their experiences with their own parents. I grew up in a very, for better lack of term, chaotic household. A lot of screaming and yelling. Um, just a very intense environment. And I just found that I had almost become so numb to it that I thought that was just a norm. I thought that was just how families operated, right? There was just a lot of screaming and yelling. When frustration came out, yeah, you just yelled. And it's been interesting in the last few years where I started to realize that there was this deeper level of criticism that was sort of embedded in how we talk to each other that I've really had to take some ownership of so that I can change my relationship with myself moving forward and my own kids and my wife.
Yes. So let's talk about the feeling that you had when the screaming, but there's no physical or sexual abuse. It was just yelling and screaming.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, I from growing up there, yeah, it was just mostly just verbal, the screaming, the yelling. Yeah.
But then when they yell or scream, like, is it more condescending words, like um some words that was hurtful?
Yeah, there it's when I reflect back on my childhood, right? And that's what I feel that my personal growth, self-development journey the last 6+ years has really been about just celebrating the past, harvesting from it, and really just drawing from it, learning more about myself. I would say that within there I developed this ability because I growing up with two immigrant parents, they worked a lot. I grew up, my grandparents raised my brother and I a lot. So there was a lot of like fending for myself, right? Like you'll sort of figure it out. And I realized that it did allow me to develop this sense that, if I want something, I'll figure it out, right? I'll take responsibility. But I also realized the other side of the coin there was this level of self-criticism that was also embedded in that I am, and I still work on this to this day, sometimes my own harshest critic, which I think many people are. So I think within that screaming and yelling, that for whatever reason, I started to pick up and develop these habitual behaviors of criticizing myself, and from there, it's been just interesting to observe how deeply ingrained some of that is.
Yes, absolutely. And then where are they from originally?
Yeah. So originally, both my parents grew up. They were both born in Hong Kong, right? And then my mom, when she did her university in the United Kingdom. My dad at that time came over to North America, came to Canada. His parents, blessed him with a plane ticket, a little bit of money, and he came over here to sort of give life a new go. And yeah, it's been interesting because the more I've developed some compassion for him, the more I start to understand like how challenging his journey was and how he did the best he could. But again, that's probably a conversation for later. But yeah,
Yeah. So as having immigrant parents, but you were born in Canada, correct?
yeah.
Did you experience any bullying or like anything, discrimination um against you, your look or anything?
Yeah, I think like most young people, we many young people struggle to find their place, and I was no different. Toronto, although people what they think of Toronto now being very diverse, right, especially being very Asian prevalent, um, I would have been the norm, not the exception. Growing up here 30 plus years ago, it was very different. I remember, uh, just not eating the same meals as other kids in my class or that I had played sports with, going on vacations that were different, or that even just the type of shows, my parents had watched were completely different. So I think for me, you add in the fact of you don't look like the majority of people you grow up with. You're your experience at home very different. Your parents come from just a different part of the world with maybe some different values, not good, not bad, just different. It really was very challenging for me. And again, you kick into that self-criticism piece. It wasn't there. And then I do remember early on being bullied, but then I quickly discovered that I had a gift for athletics and sport, and that became the tool for me to develop a different level of calm and confidence. And then the bullying went away, right? Because I began to embody a different level of calm and confidence in myself.
It's interesting. I had a guest a few episodes ago. His name is Sony, and he came from Vietnam. And he said similar thing. He was in the Baltimore area and never really experienced bullying, but then he had this athletic ability in a truck team, like truck stop, and that kind of shifted him with his presence. So it's kind of reminded me of that. Now, on top of being different in Toronto like 30 years ago, like you said, and then being Asian, and I think I struggle as well. Sometimes I'm kind of intentional and careful when I pack lunch for my children. Like, say, instinctively, I want to pack onigiri, which is the rice ball, but then what will be the consequence for my children to experience that? You know what I mean? So, like, I've heard of these things. So I try to not, like, I try to pack Americanized, like, standardized lunch for them and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So it's very interesting. And Asian culture for me from Japan and then straight from Japan, the things that I experienced in my household, JT, sometimes considered normal, but it's not normal.
Mm-hmm.
And yelling, screaming is not okay. And then there are so many ways that we can communicate through, but then our parents' generation probably never had a mental health talk, never had effect, a long-term effect, forget about that. And our generation, I'm 46 years old, growing up in Japan in 80s, forget about it. So how was it in Toronto growing up? Did you have any guidance counselor to navigate through this house issues that you maybe had? Or maybe friends or maybe mentor who understood you, what was going on at all?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. I've been blessed through sport, and through sport, there's built-in mentors and coaches, right? You get them in whatever sport you play. So I would say one of the gifts of being involved in sport was having an opportunity to be around so many different kind of leaders, right? And for me, what I found was some of the qualities that I wasn't able to receive at home. And again, my parents did the best they could. They came to a country where they knew no one. They didn't have, a trust fund where they were able to set up, and they had to work to provide for our family. And again, the price came at that their kids had to be driven by other people, had to be taking care of other people. And it is what it is. What I found from that, and again, reflecting back on my experience, was I started to gravitate to coaches that really poured time and energy into me. They were the coaches that would pick me up and drive me to games. They were the coaches that really just wanted to check in with me and see how I was doing, or they were the coaches that really spent a lot of time helping me feel connected, right? To feeling seen, to feel heard, to feel appreciated, which is our greatest human need. So I found I started to gravitate to those qualities in people, and it was interesting. I found them in sport. I found them in certain teachers. I didn't have a guidance counselor ironically enough, I became a guidance counselor when I was in education. But yeah, I did start to find other people who had those qualities that I was looking for. So I guess upon reflection, it really did take a village to raise it, right? Like my parents were, supported and me in certain ways. And then they had other adults, other calm and confident leaders that helped raise me into the person I am today.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, JT. And it's very interesting conversation because sometimes, I live in America now, and I see multiple cultures in the background. And then as an Asian, root, I don't think people completely understand the dynamic of the authoritative figure that say in Japan, if you're 1 year older, we have to immediately use the polite word. Talking back to parents, talking back to teachers, absolutely no. Where in America, kids, teenager, whoever, like talk to you anyhow. And then I've never seen that growing up. And I think another struggle is living in Canada or maybe in America because you see the comparison between your household and your social life. That so you have some sort of sense of advocacy outside the world, but then in a household you have none. How did you balance that? Do you remember, like maybe comparing with other kid who didn't have as much of controlling parents or the way that Asian culture kind of promote the authority, which definitely has pros and cons.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I would say I've gained a greater appreciation for my parents since I've had kids because I started to realize, you start to develop a different level of empathy, right? Because you start to see the world through their lens. For me, it's been an ongoing journey, and I think it's celebrating the fact of your values in life change. And I find that as I have continued to walk along there and got more clarity about who I am and what's important to me, what brings me joy, that's how I've navigated it. Specifically with my parents, again, because I was raised, I grew up a lot, spent a lot of time by myself. I had to take responsibility. I developed some pretty good people skills. So I figured out how to read a room, right? So those proverbial, I may not have had the discipline to have the book smarts, but I did develop a ton of street smarts. So I learned to navigate my parents. Again, like many Asian parents, they had very strict rules on da 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 da. I just learned to play the game a little bit more. So I learned how to present. I learned the areas I could push a little bit. I learned certain things to maybe stay quiet, not promote. But then I learned how to kind of test the edges, test the boundaries a little bit.
It's very interesting because you're male and I'm female, that in Asian culture especially, like we don't have much of the say. And then I think the boy um, culture in Asian are a little bit more respected than girls. And then I think that dynamics kind of is interesting as well. And this is really interesting conversation because you were not born in Hong Kong. You are immersed in Canadian
Mhm.
culture and then philosophy, but then your household is the world of yours that has thick Asian culture in it.
Mhm.
And the way that you described earlier on the chaos and that you thought it was normal, I heard a little bit earlier, but then mentally as an adult now, thinking back, how is it affecting you as an adult for having those chaotic childhood right now?
Yeah, it's something I work on a daily basis. What I've come to a point in my sort of own personal growth, self-development journey, as I like to call it, my own journey to greatness, that I've realized that there are parts of my past where part of the experience was to simply observe what I don't want. So I've come to realize that I don't want to have a family situation where screaming and yelling is the norm. I've decided that I want better for my family moving forward. Now, I will be the first to say, are there moments where they're screaming and yelling? Absolutely. What family doesn't have that? Um, but I've really learned that it just doesn't feel very good. When the screaming and yelling happens, if it's with my kids or something like that, it just doesn't. So, I do my best to focus on what I do want. Some days I do it better than others. But again, it's just feedback, right? Of what's going on. So I try to use the lessons from the past to create a more compelling future.
Well, thank you so much, JT. So let's actually move on to the second question, which is the tools that you use to
Mhm.
overcome this. So this is our episode 81, and so far, every guest that I had completely different perspective on tools that you use to overcome. And this is my favorite part of the podcast because to me, having this kind of conversation, had we had this access when we were growing up, I think my life would be very different.
Mhm.
And having to understand the effect, long term effect, and how we could have been prevented had we had these tools available to us. So this
Mhm.
is a very important part of the podcast for me. So what would you say the tools that you kind of mentioned a little bit that worked for you the most that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, great question. I love that. Actionable, right? Focused action is what actually creates change, right? For me, when I started it, I've come to believe that when you keep it simple, simple in life, that's really where the joy is. So for me, how that applied was being a high quality athlete and coach. For me, movement was actually the first place I started because physically moving my body, just I understood that there was a level of calm and confidence. And as anyone that spends any time in personal growth and self development knows that whenever you move, you're just shifting energy. So for me, that was the easiest access point for me. So that's where I started when I first started really doing a deep dive into myself. Throughout the last few years, it's grown and evolved. For me now, writing daily reflection uh, is the thing that really moves the needle for me. When I get up in the morning now, and there's a process. I do follow a playbook, we'll say, um, where I spend time getting my thoughts onto paper, and I find it helps me to sort of focus my mind. And through that process, it allows me to sort of brain dump. And then I also use that once that starts to sort of clear up, and think of it, when I wake up some mornings, it's like murky water. But then as soon as I start writing, it's like the pond gets like clear and beautiful, kind of like a beautiful ocean, right? Those green and blue ocean gets there. And then once that becomes a little clearer, then I start to remind myself about where I'm going. So I find that writing serves two purposes. It allows me to focus and process things, and then two, it helps me to again write the story that's going to be happening going forward. And then I'll go do the movement later in my day. I'll integrate the meditation. But yeah, so it's evolved, and so movement, daily writing, reading. Those are the ones that really move the needle for me.
I like that you said writing daily reflection and morning writing. I think that's really cleansing. So, and then you mentioned earlier on about talking to your friend who asked you some question.
Yeah.
What was the question? Do you remember?
Yeah. So this was a friend who he does a lot of work. He's a leadership expert, works with a lot in the business world. His passion is really around supporting dads. So he has a lot of, the quote unquote alpha leaders, that are titans of industry. But come to him because they need some support in the parenting and the fatherhood aspect. So I was out visiting him, and we're just sharing. We actually go back to we played football together in universities, and we've just stayed connected. And he's one of the people that knows the deep and intimate secrets of knowledge of my situation, my relationship with my father. And I just asked him what his thoughts were on the relationship. I don't ask a lot of people for their opinions. I choose to only ask people who I feel, can offer me, you know, sp- you know, specialized knowledge, wisdom to help me move forward. And he asked me, he said, "No, I think you're full of it." And I said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I don't really care about the relationship. I washed my hands of it." He's like, "I don't believe you." And he just asked me, is that how you truly feel? And from that conversation, he planted this thought seed in my mind that it just ruminated, and I think I started to maybe question some old beliefs. And from there, it just, over the next 2 weeks, I just started really reflecting on it and sort of sparked me to have some conversations. And 2 weeks later, I'm at my father's long-term care facility, having a conversation with him, lots of tears about just wanting to let go of the past and move forward. And yeah, it's been very healing and very transformative.
What are the things that you said to your father?
Yeah. It's been interesting because again, it me simply going there. I mean, he had been in this long-term care facility for over 3 months, and I had not gone. And he was surprised when I went there. First off, and we went there, and his initial was, "Oh, what do you need help with?" That's just the way, right? If I asked him for money, or if I asked him for anything, he would give me the shirt off his back. That's just how he shows his affection. That's how he shows he cares. And we just sat down, and I just said, "Dad, I'm good. I don't need anything. I just came here to see you." And the more I just reassured him that there was nothing there, um, we sat, and I just said, I'm done blaming you for the past. I just want to forgive. I want to move forward because it's holding me back from experiencing more greatness in my life. And again, there was a release of tears. And I know for me, when there's tears being released, I know it's an energetic block that's going into the ethers. And yeah, it was just a great conversation. We probably talked for 45 minutes. And we just had conversation about life. We laughed. We joked about something that we thought my mom would find funny, which I don't remember the last time him and I had an open, honest conversation. We laughed together, and then I challenged myself when I was leaving. I just told him I loved him. I'm not even sure the last time I've ever said those words to him and truly meant them, but I just felt like, if anything happens, if my time here on this physical earth ends today, or his does, I'm at peace that I've let sleeping dogs lie. And yeah, so it's been interesting. Every time we go there, I feel like I'm gaining another level of awareness.
I'm so happy that you had that conversation. And thanks to your friend, I know it was maybe harsh words to say in order to hear the truth, but sometimes truth hurts. And then I don't know why he said you're full of it, but maybe he saw it a block. Maybe he saw a pretentious of Asian culture. Like we were taught to be emotionless and then very perfect in outward, but not inward. Nobody checks in on your mental health or whatsoever. That we are expected to be very plateau and then perfect. Culture, I think. I'm very happy that you had that conversation with your father.
Mhm.
Has it really shifted your energy and then like really changed you?
Yeah, the best way to describe it is life just feels a little bit lighter. Whenever I go to see him, it just is, it's like that simple action, because I'm a firm believer, like you can think about, you can talk about making all the change you want, but if there's no consistent and focused action that follows up with it, they're just words, right? And I find for me that every time I go there, it's just I'm thinking and acting as if I am that, that highest version of me, right? Like that true calm and confident man that I always, was deserving to be. So I find when I go there, it just feels different, and I feel these, like you mentioned there, these illusions of perfection that I've also held on to for many years, slowly melt away, and I embrace that the imperfection of life, and that again, I'm just a human being on this physical planet, just having a human experience. So yeah, I find life just feels a little bit lighter every time I go.
It reminded me of the conversation that I had with my counselor. So I had an extreme abusive father, and then really challenging mom, and then not as bad as my dad. But my counselor, every time she mentioned that she contributed my PTSD as well, that I was very defensive because there's a term called angelizing. So, for instance, illusion of perfection that reminded me that, like, say, even if somebody was bad or did something wrong, if another person is worse, then the child had to latch onto somebody who was a little bit better. So it's called angelization. And then she said it's very unhealthy because it's almost like loving the statue. And then you have to accept the imperfection in order for you to love at full level. So I just wanted to echo and then share that with you.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point that, how I would best describe it is learning to love my dad like unconditionally, right? Regardless of what has happened in the past, loving him for all his blessings, loving him for all his challenges and problems and barriers. That what I'm actually doing is I'm learning to love myself. And I know that sounds so, interesting in today's culture, but learning to more and more love him unconditionally is actually allowing myself to love myself unconditionally, regardless of what is happening in my external world. So um, that's what I meant by, it's been very healing and transformative. It's just changing my relationship with myself.
I 100% agree with you. And then I appreciate you because what you had suffered in from the childhood is definitely contributing to self-sabotage. And your brain is the most powerful place on the earth where it can flip your day, it can make your day happy. And it's a shift that you mentioned a little bit about self-loving and then understanding whoever the perpetrator, whoever the contributor of the negative brain wiring of self-sabotage, instead of leveraging yourself. It's hard when you are not taught to do that. So let's actually move on to the last question, which is a gift that came from it. So, JT, again, thank you so much for being here today. And can you tell our audience how would you say a gift that came from your adversity?
Yeah, it's helped me to understand the power of learning to celebrate all parts of the journey, not just the sunshines and rainbows, and that's easy, right? That's positive thinking. But it's truly learning that you needed to go through that. And in turn, it's made you into a stronger, more powerful version of yourself. It's made you into a more calm and confident leader. And from there, I find now it's actually given me the ability to empathize with people and show them that if I can turn that challenge, that adversity into a gift, anyone can do it. So I would say that that's been the gift is to just give people a glimmer of hope that again, if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Well, thank you so much again, JT, for being here. I really appreciate our conversation.
Thank you very much for having me here.
So, everybody, this was episode 81, A Gift from Adversity. Thank you again, JT, for coming in. And then we have more guests coming in to talk about the adversities and tools and the gift that came from it. My name is Juri Love. I'm your host. See you next time.